Hi everyone. So maybe we can all start by introducing ourselves. So I will start and then we can have Chris, Juan, and Kimberly all introduce themselves, their backgrounds, and their companies. So I'm Salam. I'm the moderator for this event. I am a product engineer in robotics and sensors at Pendar Technologies. Pendar Technologies makes a standoff laser spectrometry sensor, which is a fancy way of saying we detect chemicals with lasers from a distance. So I'll hand it off to Chris.
Thanks, Salam. My name is Chris Ravenscroft. I am the founder and CEO of Beauty Gourmet. We make functional and foods and beverages just for women to help make self-care easier so that they can just take, basic things they're eating in their day and replace them with something better for you, take care of themselves without any additional effort.
Cool. So I'm Juan Morales. I'm originally from Venezuela and came to Boston around 6 years ago already for school. And then right at that time when I started school, I co-founded this company. My background is in electrical engineering, and what we're doing is developing a shirt that we embed sensors on to measure breathing and biomechanics. So this is for athletes that want to improve the performance more efficiently. So basically come up with these customized training plans based on these metrics that have been so far been only available for elite athletes.
Hey guys, sorry I'm wearing a mask. I'm at work, so sorry I can't take it off. My name is Kimberly Jung. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Pickle Robot Company. We're based out of Somerville. We're right on Webster and Prospect. So we specialize in spinning up automation that helps warehouses. So we can sort, palletize, induct. We use an off-the-shelf robot arm, and we're software engineers mostly. Most of us are from MIT. And so we're very still startup phase right now, still raising money, but also figuring out how to manage our cash flows, which I know is what we're going to talk about. In my prior life, before MIT and before Pickle Robot, I was the CEO of Rumi Spice. So I was in consumer packaged goods and retail, and we were importing saffron directly from Afghan farmers. And that was from my previous experience in the military in Afghanistan. So Rumi Spice is an ongoing concern as well. And so I'm privileged to be part of Startup Boston and share my experiences about managing cash flow.
Great. Yeah, so I'm really excited because we have a really broad range of industries today, from food and beverage to wearables to robotics. And so, yeah, so as sort of a reminder to everyone, this discussion is focused on R&D cash flows and funding, so more about allocating funding to R&D and how we manage allocating that, as opposed to other concerns like marketing or production. But because, we sort of the general funding streams still influence all of that, we wanted to start by talking a little bit about our overall funding and how that might influence R&D. In Massachusetts, in particular, there's grants specifically earmarked for R&D or for R&D facilities. And so I wanted to start by asking what sources of funding are likely to be funneled to the R&D stream. Are there specific grants or other resources that you use to help with that in addition to your normal raised funding, however that's raised? So for this question, maybe we can start with Juan and then go to Kristen.
Cool. So yeah, I wanted to thank everyone for being here first and to have this opportunity to share this knowledge with you guys. Something some of us have learned the hard way. So yeah, I would say Boston, Massachusetts in general, I think it's very healthy on the VCs and all big angels and people investing in technology. Historically has been very good with hardware, I suppose as software, which is more the West Coast historically, and there's a mix, of course. But other than that, I would say, for personal experience, I find Massachusetts very resourceful. You have in Massachusetts over 40 incubators, more than 40 incubators or accelerators. And we've been personally working with you have Mass Challenge, you have Cambridge Innovation Center, you have Bolt, which is hardware focused, and also investors themselves. So I think it has a lot of resources that you can tap into. And also there is Mastech, which is a public agency that is, they support programs like GIR, like Global Entrepreneur in Residence, which I was part of until recently, that basically helps immigrants like entrepreneurs to kind of stay here legally to keep developing their companies. But also they have this very interesting program, which is based on internships. So during the summer, for summer internships, Mastech, you can apply if you're, you have to meet certain requirements, of course, but you can hire interns and then they will refund up to 50% of your, the salary of the intern. So things like this, I think is very, Massachusetts is very innovation focused. So I think it's a very good place to be for starting it, like especially tech company.
Right. So I'm interested to hear how that's different for Chris, who's in more of like food and beverage and maybe has different funding resources.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I do think that for Massachusetts, there's an extreme difference. I think that, as Juan said, for tech, Massachusetts is amazing. I don't know if there's a better state actually in the country for it right now. However, if you're in CPG, not so much. I mean, there's been great strides in the last few years, like Lauren Abda of Branch Food. She's been amazing with bringing food and beverage more to the forefront in Massachusetts. I wouldn't say the forefront, but even to existence in Massachusetts. But this is a nationwide conference. But if you're Massachusetts or nationwide, I would suggest that you do look in other areas as well as Massachusetts, like California is very big for food and beverage. Austin is very big for food and beverage. Boulder, Colorado is huge for food and beverage. It's out there. And then you can find that there are maybe grants and pitch competitions that they open up nationwide from those areas where you can get a lot more visibility and a lot more access to resources, be it capital, advisors, things of that nature. So if I was any CPG company, actually, I would be thinking nationwide and not just in the boundaries of Mass. And then just as far as funding, I want to say besides, I think we should also just always remember that when you're a smaller company, because I know some of the other companies are larger than mine, and there's some new entrepreneurs out there, equity is a form of capital. You want to be stingy with it, but it is another form of capital for the kind of help that we're talking about with getting R&D dollars in, right? You might, partnerships, things of that nature is sometimes the way to go for smaller companies.
Great.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I sort of look at this panel as my opportunity as moderator to ask the questions that I should have asked all my CEOs past and present. And one of the things I'm really curious about is, I'm sort of reminded of personal finance when I think about business finance. So like in personal finance, there's all these rules like 50, 30, 20, spend 50% on needs like your rent, 30% on wants, and 20% on savings. When it comes to cash flows in a business, how do you manage R&D versus marketing and your other business needs? So I think this would be a great question for Kimberly with Pickle and the different expenses you might have to manage and still have R&D happening.
Yeah, thanks, Elam. I think really, of course, you have to caveat this answer by saying it's really dependent on the business because, different businesses have different needs for marketing and for R&D and for sales. My honest rule of thumb is that everything should go to sales. What I mean by that sounds crazy, right? But
Yeah.
The lifeblood of your company is revenue, and everything that you need to get revenue is where you should prioritize. And that doesn't just mean necessarily, hiring a bunch of salespeople if your product is not ready. It doesn't necessarily mean hiring a PR firm for $5,000 a month. What it means is that you have your minimally viable product that you put out there and you make sure that you have some revenue that gets generated from that. So for Pickle Robot, we spend a majority of our cash on our people because we need to have a minimally viable product that goes out into the market. And that for us is, a robot arm that does X, Y, and Z, that sorts, and it meets the requirements of that customer. Some of the examples of things that we don't spend money on. We stopped spending money on our PR firm because it doesn't directly relate to those couple sales that we critically need in the next few months. We did those just personally. We aren't spending money on more salespeople because we have 2 people who can do it right now. So anything that gets you revenue in the pipeline is what you should prioritize your cash spend on. And so for us, because we're very heavy in R&D, we don't touch how much R&D we did. When I think about Roomy Spice, my old CPG company, what we did was we hired a R&D person, like a food engineer, a food scientist, and it was a great idea to do that, but it might have been a little premature. We could have spent that money on promotions in KHE and UNFI, for example. Christine probably knows what I'm talking about, a CPG. So those were like direct promotions to our already existing products. So those are some examples of trade-offs that you would make. Ultimately, revenue right now in the next month, low-hanging fruit. That's what you should spend your money on.
Great, yeah. So when you do need to do R&D to get that sort of minimum viable product, or to develop another product in your product line or expand, one of the things I'm also wondering about is within R&D, is there such a thing as sort of a lean R&D model? Is there things within R&D that you should prioritize, and how do you sort of balance that with your different businesses? So for this one, we kind of have like a few sub questions that I'll get into with everyone. But for Kimberly, if you could expand a little bit on within R&D at Pickle, what you prioritize and how you keep it lean, because I think it's one thing to talk about the different people that you hire to work on that minimum viable product, but when you do only have so much funding to begin with, how do you make sure that all of it sort of fits within that?
Yeah, so going back to what I had mentioned about choosing the lowest hanging fruit, when it comes to R&D, you have a choice of options in front of you. You can go after more complicated projects that might be more lucrative. You might go after projects that are more lucrative but will take a little bit longer. And the way that we prioritize at Pickle is that we're going after the projects that we know that we can sell now or is really easy to get there, so it's fast. So think about the timeline, so as short as possible, and also how much it's going to cost you. So small first, and then you gradually start to build up. So for us, one example for us is that we are focusing on a very easy task that we call carrier sort. A much harder task that we did spend some money and resources on before that really burned through our cash was trying to basically do 3D Tetris on the back of a truck. That's a huge problem. If we actually tackled that problem, we would be huge, and we would make a lot of money, and we would grow very fast. That, however, is going to take like many years, and we would run out of cash before we could even, you want to be able to demonstrate to your investors on an ongoing basis that you're making these incremental improvements. So having a very easy carrier sort is the best way that we can do that, and then we build up to it.
Great. So for Juan and Chris, again, what are the most minimal R&D efforts that provide the most value in each of your sectors or for each of your companies? So maybe we can start with Juan and wearables. What's sort of the least you can do that has the biggest impact for your company?
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with Kimberly a lot about the low-hanging fruit and then just like proof of concept. So the way I would start is that you have an idea, and then you come up with this proof of concept, something that works. And then for me, the next step, which is like usually not obvious, especially if you're working on a technology that's exciting or excites you and it has like so many different applications. I think the next step would be focusing R&D on usability. So basically you want to have a product that people, you can start giving it out to people and they can test it and give you feedback, and then you iterate. Of course, it's depending on the type of company you are, but like for us, something that it's easy and quick, that we can give it to people, people can use it. We collect data, we collect information from potential customers. In I would say 80% of the cases, you figure that that's not the right market. It's not like the right fit for your product, but you wanna find these out like very early. So if you focus too much on the technology, on the R&D based on your assumptions, then you, like as Kimberly said, you run out of cash, and then you spend like 1 year, 2 years working on one technology. Yeah, very exciting. But you might not have a market for it. By the end of it, your competitors are going to just crush you because they have been focusing on what's important, which is the customer. So basically, R&D is that'll be my approach. It's just coming up with the basic product that people can start using. You can give it to people, and then it's not going to be perfect, of course. Not there's no such thing as a perfect product. As soon as you launch it the first time, that doesn't exist. Remember that the iPod, the first iPod, like that Apple launched, was like basically not usable at all. So it's about the feedback. It's about like, yeah, you have some early adopters that are gonna suffer, but then that is gonna open some more opportunities for a bigger market, which is at the end what you want. So I would say, yeah, do that, make it usable, be very good try to be good at collecting this feedback, understanding your customer or potential customer. If this doesn't work, then pivot quickly, and then be very open. You have to be very open about like what your customer or potential customers are telling you, so you can basically figure very quickly that this is not a right fit, and then you switch into a different, you come up with different features and then like try different markets and tap into different things.
So to Chris, I'm really curious what R&D looks like in your sector, and again, what is kind of the most minimum that you focus on there for the greatest value?
So what I'm really piggybacking off of what Juan said. It's in some ways it's similar, but we can focus group before we even start practically. I mean, we try to see if there's a need for our product, and especially in CPG where it's so competitive, and you are always overlapping. Like we have a beverage, obviously there's a lot of beverages available. So we have to make sure that there's a desire for our product. And what I found at least was the most valuable for saving money and time is focus grouping, but to your specific target audience. So many times people think that they're taking a survey among a group of people and that means something. If you're not speaking to your direct target audience, you will end up wasting so much money because you think that you're getting positive reinforcement back, yet the people who would actually go out and buy your product, it's not, your product might not be meeting their specific needs. So know who your target audience, and your target audience can change. Like Juan said, things do change, but you have to start out thinking you're talking to somebody, specifically survey them. And then the other way you can waste a lot of money is not knowing how to do focus groups and surveying. A lot of people like to ask very leading questions like, don't you think this is great? People are like, yeah, I do. That's not what you're looking for in a survey. You want to be more like, you want to get people's honest opinions. And then the funny thing I'll say with that is, just because people want a product doesn't mean they're willing to pay for a product. So you then have to go further and make sure, if this was available, would you pay this price point that would cost me to create this? And they'd be like, oh, that's fantastic, but no. So a lot of initial R&D dollars can be saved with that research up front.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it.
Yeah, so then I have two more questions about people, because as Kimberly expressed, and I'm sure it's true at both of your companies as well, people, including yourselves, are basically what actually makes the business run. So when it comes to R&D, do you require dedicated R&D personnel, or how do you recruit employees that can do both? Are there things you might outsource rather than hire an entire person with an annual salary? So maybe we can start with Juan.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very good question. Also, who do you bring in to your company. It's always very, very tricky, and it's a thorough process. And I don't think you never learn like how to do it the right way, because you have like um, some guidelines for some people that have done it before. You read things, but it's not always there's no silver bullet for it. So I mean, I would say this one specifically is very, very industry dependent. If you're developing a new drug, then I would say, yeah, you do need like full R&D, and then maybe you don't need like marketing or things like that. You want to focus on the technology, right? But for when you're more like mass consumer, or like you're trying to sell a product out there to regular consumer, then yes, then I would say, I mean, at the beginning, you do it yourselves. Like you founders, usually you come up with the right fit. You find a co-founder that has like some of the skills you need to develop most of the technology. That's usually a good way to go. But then after that, I would say recruiting, it's something that has worked for us very well, is that we talk to people always. We're always talking to people. Networking is very important. You might know a friend that knows another friend, and so forth. Within your network, you start very, very low key that way. And we started working with people, let's say for 3 months, and then we see if they're like startup friendly. Some people don't like to do like many different things, but that's something. Some people might say they are okay with doing it, but then when you actually work with them, it's actually not the case. So for us, it has worked well, like working with them for a little bit. Let's say give them a project of like a month, 2 months, and then try and give them like slowly more responsibilities, and then helping with other things. It's like, okay, this is something with accounting, can you help with this, and so forth. So I think you start like that, and then you like slowly find the right fits. But I think this is very tricky, and you can go very wrong with this, and but it can go well. I would say, I would add to that is keep your employees or new people you're bringing in excited. That's also something very important. Keep them like very. It's either through equity or some sort of compensation, but like keep them very happy and excited, and they will like perform better for sure.
Great. And so, Chris, I think maybe in your sector, you may have also had to send out things for tests or do R&D that way. How do you manage that?
Yeah, so as a smaller company, we don't have R&D in-house. Well, actually, we're growing to that now, but in the beginning, we didn't have R&D in-house, so we definitely used outside vendors for that. And so what I learned through that process is one of the most important things to do when you are dealing with outside vendors is to manage them. We have a lot of times when you're new, you have this image, well, this is a professional company, they're going to give me all the answers and they're going to handle our project perfectly. It's actually not the case. You need to be your own advocate to save your dollars. And the way I would say what we learned, unfortunately, was the more defined your specific needs are, again, going back to focus group surveying, et cetera, the more defined your specific needs, the less money it will cost. If you can have a referral or you have a known advisor that they're aware of, that will help you too. That's a level of protection of professionalism, that they will put your best interests at heart and not perhaps another agenda. Business is tough. It's a tough world out there. You have to be your own advocate. So that's a layer of protection that could help. And finally, you want to make sure that you are managing the project to success. Again, it just comes in mind of just making sure that you're not letting somebody else take over a project that would otherwise cost a lot less if you were making sure you were on top of it. Just, you can't go into these projects Joe-eyed. You kind of have to go in wide-eyed, and then that'll help you out. That would have helped us out a lot if we had done those things.
Great. Yeah, so I want to leave a little bit of time for a question from the audience too. So I'll go right to sort of the last question I have, which is something I wanted to ask all of you. So one of the biggest difficulties with funding R&D, of course, is that you don't always know if it will work. That's why it's research and design, because maybe the concept or a particular approach may not work. And so I was wondering if you could each share times when you may have had to abandon or pivot an R&D attempt at something, and how you managed that financial impact. How did you manage to still take some risks, but then manage the effects of when they might not have gone right? And what's sort of just the right mindset overall for managing R&D? Is anything really a waste of time or money, or how do you kind of like handle the lemons that life gives you sometimes? So maybe we can start with Kim.
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer. I mean, one specific example just recently from us is that we have a deadline for a customer. And so there's two options that we could choose. One, we could use these pre-programmed commands from the robot manufacturer, or we could spend a little bit more time and go kind of into lower level programming so we can have basically more control. Both ways have, one way is going to be easier maybe to implement, but it's going to cost us in the long run. Something called, what I just learned this was like your tech debt. So you can have an expedient solution that's going to make it so that you make it on time, but you're going to have to pay for it later with like switching around some of the code and bringing everything back up to date with what it should be. So basically, we had to make that decision between the two. It's actually somewhere halfway in between. So we're paying some tech debt later, but we're going to make it on time. I still prioritize getting stuff on time for the customer more than the other stuff. But no, I mean, it's more of an art than a science, I would say, for when to know when you should just stop and you should go back to another solution. Everybody has a different formula for that. For us, I would say we really prioritize the customer and getting stuff done on time.
Juan, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for us, we learned that focus is very key, and of course, this is easier said than done. You can say, yeah, like I would say theoretically, you create very specific milestones based. Yeah, I would also agree with Kimberly about prioritizing the customer and the features that like your customers have been like asking for. But basically focusing on your milestones, basically creating a set of milestones, and then this will keep it very lean. Like if you have like specific things to do and then you don't get distracted with other things, you have like a very versatile technology that you can go into, let's try like the medical application, let's try this, let's try that. That's a very common mistake that a lot of entrepreneurs make. So I would say that it's focus on your milestones, your customers, and also I think creating these milestones is it'll keep you focused. It's gonna be cheaper for sure, but it will also give you a sense of achievement, or if you like hitting these milestones will not just for you as an entrepreneur, but for your team. It will like create this basically sense of like you're getting somewhere, right? So that also helps with the burnout. Basically, as you keep people excited, as I mentioned before, like reaching these milestones is very important for you to like feel okay, we're going somewhere. And also I would quote our growth guru we've been working with, a very good. She says that take some time to celebrate your victories. I mean, based on your milestones, you're so immersed into this like developing, and then you hear like bad things, bad comments from your customers, and then you have bugs you have to fix and so forth. It's very easy to get lost on the bad things. So take some time, take a step back, and then think where was I like 2 months before, and then where is it that I am now, and then the things I've achieved. So take some time, take a step back, and celebrate all those victories. That's also going to help. It does help a lot, I would say.
Well, I love what Juan just said. I think that's fantastic. Do you mind if I just jump in, Salam? Is that okay?
Yep.
I
Okay.
love that. I think that's so fantastic. I'm going to go in slightly the other opposite direction. I have two things I can say that we've learned from that. And, you know, one is that failure is an option. Okay, I just want to say this. I know it's a
Yeah.
terrible thing to say, but like we had a bar program. You know, we have a very successful beverage program, which was fantastic. But we had a bar program. We went on for 9 months, and there were moments of levity where we're like, we nailed this. This is fantastic until all the fat came out of it two weeks later. I don't know. It's just a nightmare. And then, you know, we were spending this time on it. And then finally, you have to know when to end a program. Failure is an option, and that can save. We could have like put more R&D dollars into that program or said, okay, we're not on the right track here. And we ended that program in sense, saving those dollars, leaving more money, like Kimberly said, towards marketing and stuff for our beverage. It was a smarter way to put those dollars. So failure is an option. And secondly, is that, sorry, I'm going to take a look at my little notes here. What does it say here? Sorry, I know there's two things. Oh, MVP. So don't go past your MVP. It's so easy, and especially when you're in love with your own product, to smooth the edges because you think everyone's going to love your product and there's not going to need any tweaks, and you just spend all this time, possibly money, perfecting a product that you haven't gotten feedback on along the way. You can waste a lot of R&D dollars doing that. When you have an MVP, it's enough to go out, and I think, you know, Juan was mentioning this too, you know, to get your next layer of feedback, go get it and don't waste time and dollars doing things you think are important, but really at the end are just small details that you think are perfection, because you actually don't need perfection to go out and get more feedback from your clients or your customers. And that will help you.
Yeah.
And you'll find that 99%, if not 100% of the times, you're tweaking something where any of those perfections would have just been wasted time. So those would be the two things I would say we've learned.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So now maybe we can go to a couple of questions from the audience. People have been pretty active in the Slido. So one that I think is really interesting was, how do you budget for or manage your intellectual property protection? I know that's maybe important at varying degrees for each of you. It might involve actual patents or trademarks or copyrights. So does anyone want to take that one to start with?
I can jump in. So I think that, yeah, this is a very tricky question because again, it's industry dependent, but and when you're a small startup that you receive some money from angels, the last thing you want to spend on is like on an IP like filing. You know, it can be very expensive, especially here in Boston's lawyers can rip you apart. So you really have to be like 100% sure that this is what you want to go for, because also along the life of a startup, things change a lot. So you pivot, you find out like that your customer is asking for something else. So if you file very early, then you might find that like when you pivot, then you're not protected anymore, because you're basically have to like file another patent, and then it's not going to be great. It's not going to look good for investors either, that you filed on something that you're not gonna work on anymore. I would say that, and I would also say that there are some things that you want to keep as a secret sauce within your company, especially in software on like these algorithms development and things like that, that you know, or you at least think that it can make you like unique. You don't want to file a patent, because as soon as you file a patent, you're disclosing kind of what your secret sauce is, like how you do it, because that's how you get protected, right? So basically, in some cases, you have to put in a scale and see if it's really worth it to spend the money that you could spend on R&D or basically on something else, if it's really worth it. And again, this is industry dependent. For some industries is very important and very critical, but for mass consumer is not as critical. So I would say like think very good about think through it, and then try not to do it very early. So that'd be my advice.
Go ahead, Chris.
I have something to add from the trademark point of view. So is that you'd be surprised. Most people could probably file their own trademarks. It isn't that complicated. You actually really, with a little bit of effort, probably don't need a lawyer to file it. At least if you couldn't afford a lawyer, like it's going to cost you, $5,000 or whatever to file. The actual fee at the USPTO is only $275. And most people can get through that to see if they can, even if that's all they wanted to do, to sort of throw, it against the wall to see if they get it approved, and then get an attorney if there's an office action. Quite honestly, most of these office actions are pretty easy to answer, and you can call up the USPTO and they'll walk you through it. So I think what most people don't know is that they can do a lot of their own trademarking on their own. Now, some people might, if it's super important, if it's a really critically important trademark, spend the money. But if it's kind of like, well, we could name our company this, you can do that on your own.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Kimberly, is there anything that Pickle does to protect its IP, and what strategies there that you can share?
I'm actually not. I'm not as familiar with what we're doing with IP right now. I mean, we filed for IP for some of our programs, but yeah, I don't have much to add, actually.
All right, sure. So there's another question that someone asked about seeking NIH funding. I'm kind of wondering if this is a response from all the funding that's come out to fight coronavirus. But in general, is seeking government funding, maybe we can expand it a bit, as a means to get R&D a reasonable consideration? Seeking such funding also takes a lot of time. I know this firsthand because I used to also help write government grants, and it can be like 3 to 6 months before you find out if you have anything. So have any of you sought government grants or other sources of funding? Has that been helpful or reasonable to you? Chris, maybe?
So I haven't at Beauty Gourmet, but my husband and I, before this, had a medical device company called Phase One Medical, and we got an NIH grant, almost got $1 million in funds from the NIH for a particular project. And it was, I mean, who doesn't want, that kind of money for your product, for your project? But it is arduous and it is difficult. And so what I would suggest is, if that really is potentially good for your company, there are people to help. So we did this all in-house on our own, because one of our, issues is that we do because we can. You know what I mean? If you're capable of doing it as an entrepreneur, you tend to do it. And I'm not sure that was the best use of our time. I'm not sure that if it wouldn't have been better to just hire somebody to help us out with that. It is an arduous, but it's undiluted funds. And who's going to argue about that?
Yeah, I just want to add to that. In my prior startup, Roomy Spice, we purposely did not get government funds like from USAID and other government programs, because the reporting requirements that Chris is referring to were just arduous. And we would spend a lot of time, managing that. And there was a lot of overhead. Whereas if we just focused on our business and getting that revenue model and getting that pipeline and getting that minimally viable product out there and iterating on that, that's really what we should actually be spending our money on, because that's where we'd be actually also getting money. So up to you though. We never liked government money. I also worked for the government before. I don't want to take government money.
Yeah, I mean, I would add, like, as a personal experience, we, of course, as Chris said, is very good money. But it's like a second full-time job. Is very tough, and we've been, like, along the years, we've been debating, should we get the money, should we try, should we, and it's very hard, because it's again, there are people that, like, specializes on these type of things, on filing, and we actually started working with a firm that is applying basically for us. So basically, Pre took the Chris advice, and we started working with someone, because we figured that it's so time intensive and time consuming that it would, like, derail or, like, distract too much from our day-to-day jobs, and then you have to meet, like, as I said, deadlines and things, and working on this is really hard. So I would also advise working with someone that has the experience and so forth.
So we have another great question that I think actually might be best suited for Chris. So this one asked about when you're a cash-strapped startup, an R&D roadmap that involves partnering with third parties and using their resources can help a lot. And they wondered if this approach would turn off investors, or how you would sort of still communicate that your company, although you are using some outside resources, is still kind of the primary owner of this product. So Chris, do you have any advice for that person?
I do. So in some ways, it depends on the deal you make. And it's, you know, it might be critically important to put your initial dollars that you may have from friends, family, or yourself into a lawyer in that agreement that you might make with a third party who's going to give you a lot more value. Because if that third party is just taking a certain amount of equity, like your friends or family might take for the same amount of dollars it would cost them to get paid for that, whatever job they're doing, an investor is not going to look poorly on that. That's just like any other equity that's out of your company that you've given away 5% because you raised this much money from your uncle, whatever. However, if you are unaware, so again, going back to being your own advocate, vendors will put stuff into the contracts that can cause issues down the line with investors. They can say they own the formula. I mean, it can be, I've heard egregious acts. So it might be best if you do get lucky enough to have a great product that somebody wants to third party and they're a great third party, to make sure you get it reviewed, the documents reviewed. That will be really money well spent. And if the documents are, and it's just a straight equity in exchange for this, what have you, I don't see why an investor would have a problem with that.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I would add to that. So it's a funny story. We were very lucky to work with Flex, which is one of the biggest contract manufacturers in the world, basically. So they have what they call centers of excellence around the world. So they have in the West Coast, I think Palo Alto, they have the ones that work with adhesives and things like that. So they opened in Boston their Smart Textiles Center of Excellence, which was like a very good fit for us. And then one of our very early advisors got appointed as the director of textiles. So, I mean, that made a lot of sense for us to work with them. And it was really great. So I would say it depends on the partner you work with. It has to be a right fit, which in this case it really was, and it's very important. Like, yeah, going through documents, like getting the scope of work figured out, and everything is like everyone's on the same page, and there are no like surprises. And I think this is very important to review these. But once that's gone through, I don't think it's turned out for investors. I think it's actually very good. They might be worried about bigger companies like stealing your IP or things like that. But then if you really have that in mind and you go with the mindset like careful enough, I think it's you can definitely work with partners. There's nothing wrong about it.
I agree.
Yeah. So there's another question that I think calls back to our conversation about pivoting, or what you might do when you decide to switch tracks a little bit. So this person asks, what's the investor's point of view again when a startup does pivot? Pivoting in R&D for startups results in a focus change and potentially a business model change. So is that something any of you have had to communicate with investors about, or were they sort of small enough that it still fit within your original model?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it depends when you pivot, right? It depends on, like, if you've been working for 5 years and then year 4 you decide to pivot to something completely different. Of course, investors are not gonna like it because they're gonna think like they pretty much don't know what they're doing. So that's why it comes back to what I was saying about, like, come up with this MVP and pivot. If you want to pivot, like, pivot early, right? So it's not, you didn't burn too much cash So that's going to look good on investors. And then you're trying to prove your market. So investors are going to like these numbers about like if you pivot and then you start testing again, you start creating some traction. This is something that is going to look good. But I would say that it depends on when it happens and how many rounds you've raised before, and if you burn through the cash like working on something you were not sure about, and things like that. If you hired the wrong person for the team and things like that. It's a mix of things, but I would say if you have to pivot, try to pivot as early as possible. Yeah.
As Juan said, the investors, they really want to see these numbers. And I think one thing I learned from this startup and the last one is that the more that you keep them close and you keep them informed about what's going on, the better it is, because they want to be bought into the story as well. They want to learn the things that you're learning too. So specifically, Juan mentioned these metrics, and these metrics are like, lifetime value, customer acquisition cost, maybe bounce rate if you're software. It's just your basic like key performance indicators that indicate that you have a working mechanism for your business model. And kind of the other implication is if you're going to pivot, it's because what you were doing wasn't working. And you have to be able to show that as well. Or you have to be able to show if you tweaked a little thing in what the current business model is, you would actually decrease customer acquisition costs by this much. Actually, that's probably not a total business model, if customer acquisition cost is the one thing, right? But maybe it's a different types of features, right? And so you have this kind of experiment that you want to run, that if you tweak these features, you're going to see this much uptick in customers closed. So keeping track of these metrics and showing that story to investors is really how you make sure. So it doesn't really matter when you pivot, it's that it makes sense in context of what you're currently doing.
Great.
And
Okay.
just as a quick little fact, just for those who are concerned about pivoting, I think statistically speaking, the average successful company pivots 2 to 3 times before they reach their success. So pivoting shouldn't be seen as, like Juan said, if early, and like Kimberly said, if you're keeping your investors constantly updated, so they're with you on understanding the journey and your decisions. But it's not uncommon pivots, and we did it at Beauty Gourmet. We started, loosely, very early. Started as powders when we recognized that powders weren't going to solve people's issues, that they needed to have it more convenient. We started then putting nutrients into foods and beverages they were already eating to solve a problem, but we pivoted. So our early months were about looking at a different product, and then so I don't think it's not uncommon at all.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. So I think we are kind of coming up on the end here. So I just wanted to ask everyone, this has been a great session. I personally learned a lot, so thank you. Is there anything you guys would each like to share, like maybe just a minute or two of wisdom for us all out here, whether it's related to R&D or anything else you've learned while working at your current startup or multiple startups?
Yeah, I would say that R&D, something I learned is when I started this company with Arna, my co-founder, you have this conception of an R&D being about like the science, right? About like the technical side of it, and then you discover that R&D is everything. R&D is your customer, is your product market fit. You have to give it to people, and then basically, yeah, it's part of the research. It's like how do you sell, like business models is also like something you have to test. Everything is a constant R&D. So I think there is a misconception, in my opinion, about what R&D, like what most people think R&D is. It's not about like just the science, but it's everything, and it's one of the most important things in a company. Just getting to know your customer, and then getting to know even your competitors and things like that. All that is research, and very, very, very important. So I'd say that.
I'd like to harken back to what Juan had said earlier about milestones. you know, one thing that really works well for our company that we've learned recently is having these internal demos. You know, so let's say it's like me or the CEO is saying, we are going to go through this end to end and you're going to have to demonstrate this, you know, and we do this every single week. You know, otherwise there's like creep and people might be going in the wrong direction. It's very clear because of these internal demos what the priorities are for that week, and it just makes sure that we're actually on the road. So having it so that it's, you know, end to end, it demonstrates specific milestones and that it's actually run as a demo as if we were investors looking at it or something. I think that's really important. That's really helped us out a lot.
I guess I'll wrap that up with saying, you know, I think that what Kimberly said is super valuable. I think what Juana said is super valuable, especially as it relates to R&D. I would probably just take a moment to say that, especially in COVID 2020, as an entrepreneur, if there's one thing I could get an opportunity to tell you is to enjoy the ride. And whether it's R&D or whatever else you're doing, it's because there's going to be times that are miserable and there's times that are hard and that don't go right, and then things go really well, and then they don't. But just the most I've learned, and the biggest thing I can give to anyone out there is just to enjoy the ride. It's your life. So.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Awesome.
Agree, 100%. Yeah.
Great note to end on.
That's the wisdom you were looking for. That's it right there.
Yeah, so thanks to everyone so much for this panel. I hope it was as helpful to the rest of the audience as it was to me, and thank you to the audience for all the great questions. So I'll kick it back to Andy, and I think we'll wrap up this session.